The first rule of the Green Rift was carved into the entry arch in 10 languages. Do not touch the apex. Tourists posed for pictures beneath the warning. Rangers recited it to school groups. Hunters etched it into their rifle stocks like a prayer. Everyone knew what apex meant out here. A night black, tiger-shaped colossus with bioluminescent blue stripes and sabers like drawn moons. The catalog name was Xenophilus Tyrant. Locals called them Starstripes. The unlucky called them Last Sights. Lyra Hale read the rule and walked past it anyway. She wasn't reckless. She was prepared. She'd mapped wind currents, memorized scent cones, stitched a suit that masked human heat as drifting patches of forest sunlight. She'd spent half her childhood studying a single starstripe through a scope, sketching its scar patterns, noting the rhythm of its hunts. This one massive, scarred across the muzzle, left ear split was the monster that emptied villages with a rumor. Lyra had named him Gray Sun for the way his stripes lit when he stepped from shadow into dawn. At the river bend the fog clung low, and the ferns held beads of cold light. The canyon walls funneled the world into echoes. Lyra crouched, gloved hands steady over the tranquilizer she'd promised herself not to use. A ripple of silence moved through the forest. Birds swallowed their songs, insects stilled. Then the air filled with a scent like rain on iron. Gray Sun emerged between cedars. He was bigger than the pictures could hold. Pads the size of dinner plates pressed moss flat without sound. Sabers curved past his jaw, clean and terrible. Those blue stripes pulsed faintly, as if they were a living map of his breath. Lyra did not reach for her dart gun. She did the opposite. She shrugged off her pack, dropped her eyes not in fear, but in respect, and filled the air with the one story she'd practiced 1,000 times. Hello, she whispered, voice even. I'm going to sit. She did. The beast's ears rotated. The sabers angled an inch closer. His growl didn't rumble so much as arrive low, rolling through earth and bone. Lyra kept talking. She told him about the tinnitus buzz of the city she'd left, about the way her mother had taught her to listen to wind before words, about the rule she intended to break carefully. While she spoke, she mimicked grooming, the slow, visible motions of a big cat at rest. Scratch the forearm, smooth the hair, blink long. Gray Sun's luminous eyes narrowed. He matched her blink once, suspicious, offended. When she did it again, he matched twice. That was the crack. Lyra extended a hand slow, palm down. The way she'd watched the canyon foxes greet their kits. The starstripe's breath washed over her skin, damp, mineral, edged with blood. He leaned in, sabers framing her forearm like scythes. His whiskers touched first, then his muzzle. Lyra's fingers found the thick fur along his jowl and stilled. A tremor passed through the giant's shoulders, not anger, indecision. He could end her. He didn't. When she finally stroked, the blue stripes along his shoulder brightened like bioluminescent tides. Somewhere behind them, hidden trail cams blinked red. Somewhere deeper in the forest, something that hunted everything else changed the angle of its ears to listen. Lyra had just broken the rule, you don't break, and the apex hadn't killed her for it. News traveled the way it always does when it's impossible. A ranger found human footprints, beside prints the size of dinner plates, and no sign of a struggle. A drone caught 15 seconds of footage. Girl, hand buried in the mane of a myth. A hunter swore he saw a starstripe lying down. By the time Lyra returned to camp, the rift hummed. Her comms pinged with offers, threats, and a politely phrased order from the Planetary Wildlife Authority. Cease contact immediately. She powered it all down and went back at dawn. There is a grammar to bodies that share territory. Lyra learned it one slow clause at a time. She learned no threat. Sit lower than the apex's shoulder. Blink long. Keep hands where he can see them. She learned play. Flatten a palm on the earth. Slide it an inch. Stop. Let him bat your wrist with a paw heavy as a hammer without crushing. She learned respect. Pretend not to watch when he eats. Look away when he drinks. Leave gifts at the edges of his path. Salt blocks, bone with marrow. A strip of woven fabric that smelled like her so he could return the scent if he wished. Gray Sun taught to. He taught warning with a breath that thickened. A stripe that flared brighter where scars laced his ribs. He taught comfort by collapsing in the leaf glow a meter from her boot and pretending to ignore her, while his tail curled around her pack. He taught trust the night the fog froze to glitter, and he slept with his spine to her small fire. His sabers pointed toward whatever would come. It wasn't tame. It was treaty. On the 10th morning, as Lyra followed at a respectful distance, the forest gave up all pretense of safety. The understory bent under a wind with no weather behind it. Metal stung the nose. The drone of a contragraph lifter bled through the trees. Gray Sun's stripes snapped bright and alarmed. Poachers. Not the local kind with bad rifles, but the off-world traders who sold wonder by the kilogram. Their ship knifed through the canopy, scattering needles, for figures fanned out in armor the color of dead leaves. Their rifles were too smooth for the rift. Their net cannons hummed. Lyra wanted to run. Gray Sun did not. He stepped forward, shoulders rolling, sabers wet with breath. "Don't," she whispered. "Not like this." He ignored her. The net fired a crack and a hiss, and the world turned to blue lattice. Gray Sun hit it full, claws flashing. The lattice tightened, glittering, compressing muscle that could fold a bull. He roared a sound that blew birds from trees miles away, and the net's anchors screamed. As if they were alive, Lyra moved. She sprinted into the open, straight at men who'd built their lives on the assumption that everything feared them, and used the one advantage they didn't account for, being a person the apex looked at like kin. She shoved both hands through the net until it bit her wrists, and pressed her forehead to Gray Sun's muzzle. He could have torn her face off in pain. He stilled. "Down," she said into his fur. "Breathe." She matched a rhythm she knew by feel. Now 3 counts in. Hold, roar out. "Good." Again. The beast listened. The net slackened a fraction, enough for a plan. Lyra pivoted, tearing skin on the lattice, and screamed at the poachers like a banshee. "Don't shoot. You'll trip the resonance. It'll blow this whole canyon." Lies work when they rhyme with fear. Poachers were cowards with calculators. Half a heartbeat of doubt was all a starstripe needed. Gray Sun surged, pulled the anchors free, and turned net and momentum into a weapon. He flung the glittering tangle like a meteor. 2 men went down. The third swung his rifle toward Lyra. The fourth fired a dart the size of her finger. Lyra took it. It hit her shoulder with a cold punch. Her arm went numb in a lick of copper. The forest tilted. Gray Sun saw the shaft buried in her flesh and changed shape, not body, but presence. The air thickened. Every stripe along his flank burned. He didn't roar this time. He made a smaller sound, low, murderous, intimate. The fourth man ran. The third tried. The net found them both, dragged by a paw bigger than a man's chest. Gray Sun didn't kill them. He pinned them and looked at Lyra instead, waiting. She snapped the dart off a handspan from the wound, wedged the shaft in a notch of bark, and pulled. It came free in a hot rush. She swayed, tasted metal, and put her palm on his forehead. "Good," she whispered. "No more." He listened again. By dusk, the poachers were zipped head to toe in their own gear and hung by their boots from a cedar. Lyra's shoulder throbbed. Gray Sun lay on his side, breathing like an earthquake, trying to be quiet. When she dozed, his tail touched her boot once. A question. She twitched it back. An answer. Treaty, reaffirmed in blood neither of them had wanted. They came in suits and smiles. The Planetary Wildlife Authority, the Rift Conservancy, a liaison from the Interstellar Biodiversity Council with a pin that cost more than Lyra's kit. They arrived with medical packs and paper cups and a building, made of prefabs that unfolded like a silver flower in a meadow. The words they used were the kind that sound reasonable even when they're cages. For your safety, for public order, for the good of the species. Lyra let them bandage her shoulder. She accepted their tea. She stared through the liaison when he said the phrase unique leverage. "We don't intend to keep it," the liaison assured, palms up. "We intend to study the mechanism of your rapport under monitored conditions." Monitored conditions meant fences and tranks and collars. That pinged obedient data. Monitored conditions meant dread. Gray Sun did not attend the meeting. He slept unseen in the tree line, with one eye open. Stripes dimmed, even hidden. He bent the space of the meadow grass, lay flatter where his shadow thought about falling. Lyra said, "No." The liaison's smile warmed by a degree. "You misunderstand. The Council can authorize containment if a Tier Omega predator forms an attachment. It endangers poachers," she said, "and your grants." That smile cooled. Apex relationships destabilize ecosystems. Relationships, Lyra repeated. You mean treaties? He's kept every one of his since we made them. Can any of you say the same? The council man's eyes went flinty. You are out of your depth. Ms. Hale, then learn to swim. Rangers who didn't get paid enough to hate people glanced away to hide grins. The liaison closed his holo and stood. We'll reconvene tomorrow, with enforcement. They left behind a tripod of automated scent bait heavily disguised as a non-intrusive camera and a drone nest with rotors that whispered. Lyra waited until the meadow emptied, then walked to the bait and opened it with a screwdriver. Inside, attractant gel, more darts, and a transmitter tuned to a frequency the starstripes hated. She smashed it with a rock. Behind her, branches shifted like a breath. Gray sun padded out of the trees and collapsed a polite distance away. Pretending this meadow was his by ancient right, Lyra sat beside him and leaned back against his ribs. The night rose around them, crickets with voices like tiny bells, the river telling secrets to stones, stars doing the patient work of light. Tomorrow they bring fences, she said. You can leave. He blinked, slow. He didn't. Thought so. It was not courage that kept her then. It was stubbornness with a twin name, love. Morning arrived with enforcement. 5 rangers who didn't want this, to authority officers who did, and a council man who thought he was inevitable. They spread across the meadow with portable pylons that would knit a cage from air. The first pylon thunked into soil like a stake through a promise. Blue light rippled along Gray Sun's flank. Lyra stood. You'll start a war, she warned. We'll end a mistake, the liaison corrected. He didn't see the starstripe move. He saw a blur of shadow and the shockwave of displaced air, and then he was on his back. With a paw on his chest, sabers hovered inches from his face. His guards raised rifles and froze when the apex did not finish the kill. The tip of a saber touched the liaison's lapel pin and peeled it off as gently as a mother undressing a sleeping child. Lyra stepped between them, palms wide. Eyes on me, she told the rifles. Breathe, she told the beast. The liaison choked. Containment protocol. Protocol is for when we don't know what happens next, Lyra said, not looking away from Gray Sun's eyes. I do. She lifted a hand. The starstripe leaned his skull into her fingers like a mountain deciding where the valley should go. The rifles lowered because there are some scenes a person cannot look at and still believe only in. Bullets. Lyra kept her hand on that impossible head and spoke loud enough for cameras and trees. And whatever gods govern new covenants, you want a mechanism, she said. Here it is. You don't own the apex. You don't bait it, collar it, or study it until the studying leaves teeth marks on the world. You learn its grammar and you keep your treaties. That's it. That's all. She looked at the rangers. Not the liaison. We can do this together. Or you can put up those pylons and find out how many you have to plant before every tree in this rift turns into a story about how you forgot how to listen. Silence hummed. Wind patted down the grass like a mother ranging hair. A blue jay cursed in a dialect 20 million years old. The oldest ranger, the one with knees like creaking gates, planted his pylon in the dirt and never turned it on. I've got grandkids, he grumbled. I'd like them to have something worth visiting that isn't a museum of our mistakes. One by one, the others followed. The liaison stood very still beneath a paw the size of his head and recalculated his career. Fine, he managed. A trial period. Conditional. Lyra smiled without kindness. Welcome to monitored conditions, she said, and scratched Gray Sun's jaw where the scar made a white map. Through black fur, the apex closed his eyes. Cameras blinked, then blinked again as if they knew they were witnessing the first line of a new sort of law. The covenant didn't arrive like thunder. It accreted like lichen making rock into soil, one soft insistence at a time. Lyra wrote the first draft on a ranger's metal table that wobbled if you leaned too hard, under a buzzing strip light that flickered every 7th breath. She used a pencil that kept breaking and a stack of old incident forms. When she finished, her hands were stained graphite and coffee brown. The Rift Covenant, we are guests. We keep our promises. We leave a place better than we found it. Below the bones. The meat, no fences in starstripe corridors. No collars, no darts, no educational feedings. Drones fly high and silent. Shared patrols, 2 rangers, 1 biologist, 1 local elder rotating. Accountable to each other before they are to their agencies. Poacher response, de-escalation first, but if the forest bleeds, the forest answers. Truce lights at observation platforms. If the blue lamps burn, the apex is present. No one runs, no one reaches, no one pretends not to be afraid. Rangers penciled margins. Biologists argued for language about baselines and carrying capacity. Elders added lines that didn't translate neatly, but fit anyway. Leave your greed at the arch. Do not borrow your grandchildren's world to pay for your convenience. The Interstellar Biodiversity Council liaison signed with his jaw clenched. He'd lost his pin to a saber and his certainty to a camera. That had made him famous in the worst possible way. He tried to reframe the Covenant as a pilot program with key performance indicators. Lyra let him talk. The Covenant would outlast any acronym. Grey Sun did not sign. He wandered the tree line while people hammered the truce lamps into bedrock and pretended he wasn't watching. At dusk, when the last lamp glowed blue, he lay down in the meadow as if to say, "All right, try it your way." Lyra sat beside him, close enough to feel the rumble of his breath in the ground. She didn't touch. Treaties start with restraint. The first test, fire 3 weeks after the ink dried. The rift burned. It had rained nothing for 60 days. Pine resin hung sharp as knives. When lightning walked across the sky, it put its foot down and left a mark. Flame took the canyon like a lover who meant to ruin you. It climbed trees like ladders, crossed the river like it wasn't there, turned the air to soup and ash. The truce lamps flickered strange in that light. Blue fighting orange. Rangers ran hose and hope. The Conservancy's old bomber coughed into the air and stitched a fire line with red slurry that looked obscene against the trees. Lyra pulled mask and goggles and filled her lungs with the taste of coins. She wanted to run toward the trail where Grey Sun slept, but trees cut both ways. If he chose smoke, she would trust him to outrun it. Then came the scream. Not an animal, metal. The big DC-9's port engine coughed blood and went quiet. The old bird lost lift wrong, a listless tilt, a falling leaf the size of a building. It aimed itself at the observation platform on Switchback 9 full of kids, whose parents believed in lamps and law. Lyra didn't think. She ran. The wooden stairs boiled heat. The bomber's shadow leaned across the clearing like a scythe. She could see the pilot's teeth where his mouth stretched tight. See the number 72, stenciled on a fuselage older than she was. A blue streak cut the smoke. Grey Sun burst from the trees like a storm had grown legs. He didn't roar. He didn't need to. He launched himself up the platform's flank and hit the guardrail with a shoulder. Like a wrecking ball, the rail gave. The kids went over, not into air, but into muscle. The apex scooped them with his spine and let gravity slide them toward the slope, where Rangers waited. Arms out, jaws hanging. The bomber clipped the platform and cartwheeled into the river, steam screaming. Lyra threw herself onto the deck as boards flipped. The world became hot, fast wood and falling nails, and the memory of childhood roller coasters. When the noise peeled back, she was on her stomach, spitting splinters. The platform leaned at a sacrilegious angle. The river boiled where aluminum sank. Grey Sun stood knee-deep in foam and firelight, steaming. A child clung to his mane like faith. He shook gentle and the boy slid into a ranger's arms. The star-striped stripes pulsed to bright. He was overclocking. Lyra stumbled down the stairs that weren't stairs anymore and set her palm on his forehead. "Breathe," she said. "In 3, hold, out." He matched her. The blue dimmed. The kids screamed again, not in fear now, but the way people scream at concerts when the world is bigger than they can fit behind their faces. No one fired the rifles they'd brought out of reflex. No one would have dared. The second test, politics. Fire you can wet down. Politics you have to outlast. The footage of a starstripe hauling children off a broken platform into waiting arms flickered through a million feeds. Hashtags sprouted. Corporations rebranded faster than rivers change beds. The council liaison did 10 interviews where he said nothing and looked like he was thinking. Funding requests that had sat for years like stones were suddenly light enough to move. It made new enemies. An off-world trophy guild posted a bounty large enough to make cowards brave. A senator from a city that hated the forest simply because it wasn't paved introduced a bill that would strip dangerous myth-fauna protections in mixed-use growth corridors. The bill's summary used the word rationalized 3 times. Lyra didn't go to the Capitol. She sat with a grandmother named Inez in the canyon town and drank coffee that tasted like ash, because ash had been in everything lately. Inez told her in a voice that could open locks without a key. People who think they can whisper forests into submission always forget that wood remembers. Lyra recorded that line and sent it to every feed that would take it. It grew legs. The senator backpedaled with the grace of a man falling off a dock. The third test, a break in the Gramarina Thursday that smelled like rain. Gray Sun killed a steer. It wasn't the first time an apex had taken livestock. It was the clause rangers dreaded because it sits at the seam between rhetoric and rent. The steer had wandered onto the wrong side of a fence that was in the wrong place. To begin with, post-storm patchwork trampled by last month's panic. The rancher found what was left and howled. He wasn't a bad man. He worked a hard valley with weather like a mood. He had 3 kids and debt like a mountain. Made a treaty with a fairy tale. He spat at Lyra. Now my children eat fairy stories for dinner. Lyra could have cited the compensation fund. She could have explained corridors and carrying capacity. She could have blamed the storm or the fence or the history of land that was never seeded clean. She did something harder. She asked him to come. They walked the ridge where the starstripe had dragged the steer. Lyra knelt and traced the prints. He did not kill near your herd, she said. He grabbed the one that wandered and pulled it into cover. He minimized spook. He took what he needed. The rancher stared at the ground the way people stare at old letters from people who hurt them. He saw maybe the care in violence. Then Gray Sun stepped from the trees, and theology left the conversation. The starstripe did not crouch or lunge. He stood in the open with the wide, regal stillness of a king who will not beg. His stripes were steady. He didn't blink long or roll his shoulder to soften himself. He offered nothing but the truth of what he is. Lyra put a hand out, half warning, half prayer. The rancher didn't move. He breathed like a man being born at a stupid age. At length, Gray Sun huffed, a sound like a bellows deciding not to work today, and turned into the trees. When he was gone, the rancher said, that thing could take my whole herd because it wanted to, not because it had to. And it didn't. We'll pay you, Lyra said. But that is not the point I want you to keep. He nodded once, curt. Like a man signing a contract he wrote himself. He paid for the next truce lamp out of pocket. His kids put blue stripes on their backpacks. The ceremony change needs rituals. The rift invented one. They didn't call it a dedication or a reopening, because the rift had never closed. They called it listening. At the arch where the old rule was carved, do not touch the apex, they bolted a new plaque beneath in letters that glowed faintly after dusk. If the apex touches you, be worthy. Kids traced the words with fingers stained with berry juice. Elders spoke names of trees that had stood before their great-grandparents were whisper thin. The poet read the line Lyra loved most. We do not master the wild. We master ourselves in its presence. Lyra didn't want a speech. She spoke anyway, because treaties are promises and promises need voices. I broke a rule, she said, standing where the blue lamps bled their soft color into evening. I touched the apex. It didn't kill me. That isn't a trick. It's not magic you can bottle. It's work. It's noticing. It's giving up the kind of control that only feels like safety. This covenant will break if we forget and try to make the forest obey like a pet. It will break if we pretend there won't be blood sometimes. There will. But when it happens, we will answer with proportion and humility, not panic and fences. She looked to the tree line, where she could feel Gray Sun without seeing him the way you feel a storm that hasn't rolled over you yet. He kept every promise he never signed. We can keep the ones we wrote. Truce lamps brightened as if the dusk had put a hand on a dimmer. A wind moved the meadow in a ripple. Gray Sun stepped into view as if the stage manager had given him a cue. There was a gasp, the kind you hear in churches when the impossible does not ask your permission to arrive. He walked past Lyra. brushed her hip with a tail that could take her off her feet if he chose, and paused beneath the arch. He lifted his skull and breathed on the new plaque. It fogged and cleared. The crowd made the small sounds people make when language is insufficient. Lyra lifted a hand not to take a bow, but to hide the foolish sting in her eyes. She felt the weight of sabers and scars and the weird, fragile courage that bridges species. After the rift still had teeth. It rained in wrong months sometimes. Poachers tested edges. A council subcommittee tried to rename the Covenant a framework for adaptive coexistence, and nearly killed it with jargon. Rangers got tired. Biologists argued about sample sizes. Lyra's shoulder ached when the thunderheads stacked, but the grammar held. A year later, a starstripe walked the ridge above the canyon town at noon. He did not come down among people. He looked at them the way the moon looks at oceans. Someone started to clap. It felt wrong. Then a child not yet ruined by explanations lifted a hand and blinked long, just once. The way a girl had taught a monster and a monster had taught a girl. The starstripe blinked back. Phones blinked too, of course. That's how stories travel now. But more important, spines straightened, jaws unclenched. A town that had learned to sleep with one ear open closed both for a whole night, and woke to find nothing worse had come of it than good dreams. Lyra kept walking the river bend at dawn, boots damp, breaths pluming in the air like small ghosts. Sometimes Gray Sun met her, sometimes he didn't, and that was as it should be. When he did, she put her palm on his forehead and felt the warm hum of life, vast and perilous and uninterested in human permission, and she matched her breathing to his until the universe shrank to the size of a rhythm to creatures shared without words. The old rule stayed on the arch because some truths should be hard to forget. The new line stayed beneath because some courage should be easy to read. Do not touch the apex. If the apex touches you, be worthy. Lyra touched the plaque once, as if touching the first page of a book she would keep rereading, and followed the trail into green. Behind her, the lamps burned steady blue, and ahead of her, something immense moved through the understory without breaking it. And she moved too, careful and right, in a world that was not hers and therefore finally felt like home.